Hello, good evening. I'm so glad you have come out on this blustery night to participate in our fantastic event on populism and the future of economic policy in the United States. My name is Alex Hurdle-Fernandez, and I'm the Herbert Lieben Professor of Government here at Columbia's School of International and Public Affairs, or SIPA. And on behalf of the Institute of Global Politics here at SIPA and the Washington Center for Equitable Growth, it's my pleasure to be hosting this conversation together with Equitable Growth on a really important set of topics. Across the globe, we've seen populist leaders, especially authoritarian right-wing populist leaders, challenge the institutions of democracy and norms of liberal society, and they're gaining support and winning elections. The United States is no exception. We are living in an age of right-wing, often authoritarian populism. The rise of this kind of populism both threatens the health of liberal democracies as leaders undermine civil rights protections, attack independent civil society institutions, and ignore constitutional checks and balances. But it also threatens inclusive economic growth, including by shifting to more personalistic modes of regulation, enforcement, and policymaking. Facing these threats, how should policymakers here in the United States respond? And what can they learn from academic research in economics, sociology, and political science on the rise of right-wing populism and its connection to economic policy? Is it possible to imagine more inclusionary forms of populism that both support liberal democracy and inclusive economic growth going forward? These are big questions, and they touch on both the economy and democracy, which is why I was delighted when the Washington Center for Equitable Growth approached me about teaming up to tackle them together. As Shana Strom, Equitable Growth's president and CEO, will explain more in a moment, we've been working together over the past year to commission briefs and explore research from sociologists, economists, and political scientists on the connection between economic policy choices in the past and the appeal of right-wing populism in the present moment, and what an economic policy agenda could look like that could both build stronger support for a durable democracy and produce more inclusive economic growth for our society. Tonight's discussion here at SIPA builds on that work, marshaling the expertise of distinguished policy thinkers and leaders to explore what that future economic policy agenda could look like. And we'll discuss as well, as I mentioned, whether more inclusive forms of populism might be possible, what they might look like, and who might lead those efforts. Tonight is also the inaugural public event for the American Democracy Initiative here at SIPA, which I'm delighted to be launching under the auspices of our Institute of Global Politics. The American Democracy Initiative aims to bring together academic expertise in conversation with policy thinkers and political leaders to develop actionable ideas to defend and deepen American democracy at our current moment of crisis. The initiative will focus in particular on the political economy of democracy, thinking about the interplay between markets and government and how they can support democracy. For far too long, our democracy concept that we've held in our heads have often focused too much on the electoral elements of democracy and not enough on the political economic foundations. And so these are exactly the themes that we'll explore in this initiative and the event here tonight. Let me close by thanking the Equitable Growth partners for their deep collaboration on this work and the event tonight, as well as the hard work of both the SIPA events team and the Equitable Growth events team who made it all happen, including Christina Shelby, Susan Lee, Mariana Pecoraro, and as well as the EG staff and partners, Shana Strom, Melissa Grober-Morrow, Elena Waski, Chantel Lake, Samira Fazili, and Jacob Lievenloof. I also want to acknowledge that tonight's event has been generously supported by the Center for Political Economy here at Columbia. With that, it's my pleasure to turn things over to my friend and colleague, Shana Strom, Equitable Growth's president and CEO, to share more about this project and tonight's event. Over to you, Shana.
Well, thanks, Alex, for your amazing work on this event, and thank you to the Columbia SIPA Institute for Global Politics team for your partnership. Good evening, everyone. I'm Shana Strom. I'm the president and CEO of the Washington Center for Equitable Growth, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's event. Equitable Growth is a research and grant-making nonprofit that connects economic policy evidence and policy to promote shared prosperity and economic growth in the United States. A growing body of evidence shows that the economic policies of the last 4 decades have failed to deliver shared prosperity, and that economic growth has been constrained by rising inequality. Too many people in this country have experienced rising costs for housing, education, care, healthcare, and other basic necessities like groceries. As an evidence-based organization, we partnered with Alex over the last year to bring forward evidence across disciplines on how people's experiences of economic policy have shaped support for authoritarian populism. We published a series of essays on our website that explore the causes as well as potential solutions to strengthen democracy, and held our first event on this topic in May. Several themes emerged from the essay series in May event, including that many people in the US feel less respected than they used to, and long for a time in the past when they had that respect. They're more easily persuaded by rhetoric that others are to blame. We also see the quality of people's experiences at work have declined, along with decline in union membership, and that organizing can be an effective tool to support democracy by creating opportunities for people to experience democracy in the workplace. And there's a through line across the essays that widening inequality leads to increasing concentration of political power among the wealthy, leading to a less responsive government and loss of trust in institutions, creating a cycle that imperils democracy. We believe that in order to have a dynamic and inclusive economy, it is imperative that policymakers consider the downstream effects on democracy as they create and implement economic policies. Without this intention, we risk even higher levels of inequality and lower economic growth. Even some of the traditional approaches that government uses to remedy economic inequality are insufficient if they do not take into account factors like dignity, respect, and the community that people live in. We seek to use concrete evidence to chart a better path forward, one that leads to equitable economic growth that people can feel and gives them hope for the future. This evening's conversation is intended to provide additional context for how economic policy affects democracy, and to push us to consider policy ideas that are grounded in people's experiences of the economy. We'll have two panels for tonight's discussion. The first panel will focus on rebuilding trust in government for equitable economic growth. And the second panel will focus on bipartisan solutions to achieve prosperity for working class Americans. We have a great lineup of speakers and some lively discussions ahead, so I hope you enjoy tonight's event.
Welcome to the stage, Don Graves, Sherry Berman, Joseph Stiglitz, Matt Turk, and moderator Lydia DePillis.
Hello, everyone. It's really nice to be here. I'm a reporter with the New York Times where I cover the economy and have been speaking with Equitable Growth scholars and fellows for its entire existence. It's great to see them hosting this discussion about something that they have warned about and talked about and tried to understand for that entire time. We have a really excellent panel. They compose this so well because we've got local experience in Mayor Turk of Allentown, scholarship in the form of Joseph Stiglitz and Sherry Berman from Columbia and Barnard, and Don Graves, who was a Commerce Department official in the Biden administration with some national perspective. So to start things out, I wanted to ask Professor Berman to set the stage a bit because her research currently is on economic populism and cross nationalities and time and space. And our mandate in this discussion is to spin things forward to understand solutions, but I think it's worth spending a tiny bit of time on why we're here in this moment. And so first of all, Professor Berman, is there something unique about the US? Because right-wing populism has been on the rise across the globe, and I'm wondering if we're just following everybody else's lead or if this is something particular that we need to understand.
Great. Well, I'm happy to be here. And I can say as a comparativist that in a lot of ways the United States is not unusual. In the case of right-wing populism, there are right-wing populist parties that have been growing across other advanced industrial nations. Europe is the most obvious example. And also relevant is that there's been a big jump in support for populists since the financial crisis, which again leads us to look for some of the economic causes of populism, some of the reasons why people have grown dissatisfied and therefore willing to vote for people who are not just kind of, anti-elite, but often anti-system. So, I mean, yes, the United States is in a way sort of a follower because we've seen right-wing populism on the rise in Europe for actually quite some time, and in power actually in a variety of European countries, both in the western and in the eastern halves of the continent.
Yeah. And is there, everyone, please feel free to reply as you like, this is a conversation, but is there a reason why the turn has so often been to right-wing authoritarian forms of populism as opposed to left-wing, more socialist forms of populism?
So that's a great question, and actually a little counterintuitive, right? Because I think we all agree, since we're in this room, that economic dissatisfaction and economic grievances have a lot to do with rising populism. Yet, the form that populism has taken primarily has been right-wing. And if we look at these parties, actually, the things that they run on, interestingly enough, are not directly those economic grievances, but rather cultural and social ones. So that's something that we may want to talk about, is how those two things fit together. That said, there are strong left-wing populist parties in some countries, in Latin America, for example, and in some European countries like France. So, and we may be seeing actually a version of that rising within the Democratic Party in the United States. So while right-wing populism has been by far the more popular form of populism in the advanced industrial world, it is not the only form of populism, even within that, collection of countries, so to speak.
Yeah.
Well, let me just comment.
Please.
What we mean by populism is we've not really defined it. So my own feeling is that somebody like Madami, who's called by some people a populist, is not a populist. He's just delivering maybe what people want. And
Is that not populism?
well, that's the question. If you call any form of process a democratic outcome that reflect what people want, populist, then isn't democracy always about populism? And so I feel uneasy
Sure.
about some of the vocabulary. I think what a defining characteristic that we think about as populist is that they're promises that are untethered with economic constraints with what can be delivered. Say, just because you're articulating what people want and what they should get is not necessarily populist.
Okay, fair. So unrealistic promises of what people think they want or express.
That's right.
Right. Well, I was going to ask, Professor Stiglitz, do you think there are policies that have managed to reverse democratic backsliding over the course of history? Like, we know that inequality has been rising and led to the establishment of some of these regimes, but have we managed to pull back from the brink through policy?
Well, I mean, maybe we should go back a little bit about what is the source of the right-wing populist movement in the United States. And I think your point was well taken, that it's actually going on in many other countries, so it's not just the United States. But we've had an enormous increase of inequality, both between countries, but especially within countries. And what's been particularly I think corrosive is that it was done over the last 40 years with a set of policies, neoliberalism, which promised trickle-down economics. Growth would be higher, so much higher that even if more of it went to the top, so much would go down to the middle and the bottom that everybody would be better off. And it was just not true. And it was known to be not true when these ideas became popular. I mean, people like me were attacking those ideas when they were put forward, but they didn't deliver. And I think the fact that so many people, including in the Clinton administration and Obama administration, bought into those ideas, so it was bipartisan, and then didn't deliver, led to a lot of discontent,
Yeah.
a lot of dissatisfaction. And I think the final thing you very briefly mentioned is, I think a defining moment was the bailout of the banks. because at that moment you bailed out the perpetrators of the problem that had created the economic failure, that had created the problem. And so here you had seemingly progressive governments, Obama,
Sure.
Clinton had set the stage by deregulation, and Obama bailed out the people who behaved badly in a predictable way as a result of deregulation.
Right.
And that gave rise to the Tea Party movement.
Yeah. So
and so I think there is a sense of that those are the things that gave rise to it. And I think if you're going to get out of that, one has to begin to say, these are the mistakes that we made,
Right.
and this is where we have
So,
to go from there.
and that's a great segue, this sort of sense of disillusionment to go to Don, because the Biden administration, I think, recognized all of this and internalized it and manifested it in policy that was genuinely trying to fix some of these issues. And yet, here we are back with a President Trump. And so I'm wondering, as you constructed policies at the Commerce Department, did you think about democracy? Are there things that you would have done differently in order to bring us to a different place?
Sure, of course, and thank the Washington Center and the Institute for having us. We saw what had happened in previous administrations, and part of the construction of the legislation, the programs, was to deliver in ways that was more egalitarian, more open, was more focused on delivering for communities that had been left out, as the president would say, cut out of the bargain. He always talked about how there was this bargain that had been in this country, that everyone, if you worked hard, then you had a shot, and that so many people had been cut out of that bargain. And so we were determined to deliver a set of policies and programs that didn't do that. The challenge, though, is, and we learned this the hard way, is that it's not only what policies are you delivering, it's how you deliver them, where you deliver them, when you deliver them, and also whether or not your policies and programs actually are delivered in a timely fashion and connect with the people that you're supposedly targeting. So it became a challenge for, I think, for us in the administration to move fast enough, and we didn't apply the lessons that we had learned in previous eras effectively to move maybe more quickly, because we sort of got trapped in this notion that the institutions will deliver and we were the institutionalists, rather than breaking down those parts of the institution that aren't actually, that haven't for generations delivered for our constituents.
So Mayor Turk, how is this looking from Allentown? Are there like authoritarian takeovers?
Not yet
in post-industrial West cities?
So first, I've got to comment. I'm grateful to see that Professor Stiglitz and I are both New Balance men.
True proletarians.
Yes.
Yeah.
American shoe manufacturer in Boston, actually. But so there are not like authoritarians running rampant in Allentown. But I think a lot of what has been said, I'm really intrigued by, particularly when we get to that idea of trust in government and this idea of delivering on an economic promise. Part of the challenge, and this is a challenge that I know the Biden administration faced, is it is about how and where and when you deliver these timely interventions and where they go to. But fundamentally, it is hard for a federal government to deliver on the promises made when they don't have the direct control over the delivery system. And the direct control over the delivery system invariably is city government, right? The way to build trust in government is by filling potholes and by making sure that people's basic needs are taken care of, and one of those is housing. And I think what we see in a city government is that when people are looking for their government, when they're looking to see where their tax dollar shows up, it's easiest to find on the street in front of their house. And if they don't see a change to their livelihood in a city like New York or Allentown or San Francisco, it's easy to, and it's been promised by a president or by a congressperson and nothing happens, it's easy to turn around and blame that person for not getting it done.
Yeah.
So I think we can see it brewing in a city like Allentown, but it manifests in those federal and state elections.
So they blame the feds, not you.
I think, yeah, I do think so. I think that, mayors are, look, in Pennsylvania, am I allowed to curse? Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania talks about getting shit done, right? He is a governor, and he knows that one of the ways that he does that is through working with cities and through working with mayors, because fundamentally, when we wake up in the morning, if we haven't gotten things done, we have to answer literally to our neighbor, who's the person who voted for us and voted for us to do that. The president or a senator or a congressperson has the luxury of being in Washington and sometimes in the district and not having that regular interaction. So when you get to the unrealistic promises that might be made, it's easy for a federal person to do that. Mayors don't have the luxury of doing that because they'll be out of office immediately.
Right. Well, I want to say, because the Governor's Department knew this. Like, you all tried to deliver IIJA funds and IRA funds directly to cities, especially in red states, that would get in the way. So did that not work? Like, what?
No, it did work. It just, some of that takes time. And I think actually about what we did in the Obama administration in one place in particular, the work that happened in Detroit. And I'm grateful that my former colleague and dear friend Samira Fazli is here. The two of us and the team had the opportunity to lead this effort to deal with a city that, as President Biden would say, was, on its back, trying to climb out of the bankruptcy. It was dealing with the effects of the Great Recession and the bailout, but the big three was no longer, essentially. And the city had the effects of 50 years of bad policies and doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on one industry. So we came in and said, we're going to deliver services and federal dollars in a way that hasn't been done before, and had a team on the ground. I was there every day, every week for a long period of time, working with the mayor, working with the governor, the financial manager, trying to figure out ways to cut through the red tape. And I'm grateful that I had a team of unbelievably capable colleagues, career employees across the federal government who knew exactly which levers to pull. And they were just waiting for someone to say, oh, you're giving me permission to do this thing that I've been wanting to do all along, but I couldn't because of the bureaucracy. That is what we should be doing, empowering these people who have great experience and capabilities and know-how. And then you can make a more effective set of policies. But too often, we in Washington get in the way of that type of clearing of the brush and just letting people do the things that they know need to happen. And also, just as important, maybe more importantly, and I know the mayor cares about this because I've seen what Allentown has been doing, letting the local partners, the local stakeholders come up with some strategies of their own, or at least take the ideas that maybe we have in Washington and then they run with it, rather than Washington saying, here's exactly how you have to deploy these resources, here's exactly what you have to use them for. We say, let the city and its stakeholders, within parameters, you deploy those resources, and you can be much more effective that way. We didn't do that.
Can I ask the mayor something? A big issue right now in New York is the issue of housing affordability. Some people talk about the abundance economy, it's regulation, but on the other hand, other places in the world have addressed the problem through public housing, like in Vienna. Do we have the tools? Is it red tape that's holding you back, or is it resources, or is it, in fact, a mindset in the U.S. that we don't have the capabilities that people in Europe have, like Vienna, and we just can't do it?
Yes. So all of that. And I think one of the things mayors loved the Biden administration because the Biden administration fundamentally understood putting resources in the hands of mayors and letting them do what they needed to do. But every city around the country, it's not exclusively New York that has an affordability crisis around housing, and it stems from a lack of supply. Cities did spend decades making it harder and harder to build housing, and they have many leaders of cities have reversed course, but there's still policies that have been in place that make it harder to do that. We in Allentown, we adopted a new zoning code that is going to allow for greater levels of density, greater levels of flexibility in what types of housing you can build and where. And that comes from, I think it comes from listening to folks, right? And I think what Don was saying is that when you're making these investments and giving the people in a city the ability to invest where it's needed, like that is a form of populism, right? And as well, being sure that when people feel like they don't trust government, it's in part because they haven't felt like they've been seen. And if they don't feel seen and if they don't feel heard by politicians, their quick answer at the polls is goodbye.
Yeah. Well, I was hoping to bring Professor Berman back into this. Like, are there places where progressives have proposed like ambitious things and delivered, and has that kept the polity grounded in participation and a feeling of inclusion? Like, do you think of successes in the U.S. or I guess other places?
So let me say two brief things before I get to that question, which is a tough one, right? Which is, first, I think it is very important, as Professor Stiglitz said, not to assume that populism is by definition anti-democratic, right? So it's certainly incorrect to say anybody who proposes policies, whether they're economic or otherwise, that are further to the left or even to the right of what is the norm is anti-democratic, right? Populism comes when people feel like democratic institutions and actors are not responsive to them or representing them. And so we've had, as discussed earlier, populist movements in this country that are very democratic. The original term populism, of course, comes from movements at the end of the 19th century. So we shouldn't assume that populism and anti-democratic things are exactly the same. So I want to say that I think that's a very important point. And thinking about where that line is something that, both as scholars and politicians and activists, we should be careful about. So your question is, are there good examples today of people coming up or places where there have been progressive economic policies that have fought back on populism? I would say the answer to that is yes, but, which is to say that some places have been more successful in fighting back against populism, but interestingly enough, less by coming up with dramatically innovative economic policies and more by undercutting their ability to appeal to social and cultural grievances. However, we have very good historical examples of this. I mean, if we look back at the New Deal era in the United States, I mean, FDR understood what he was doing as very much fighting not just back against an economic crisis, but against people who were really raising flags about democracy itself. So, I mean, I think we have good examples historically of times when, economic policy or seeming economic activism on the part of government was crucial in fighting back potential threats to democracy. And I mean, I think that's a perfectly standard interpretation of what was going on during the New Deal, for example.
Well, so a lot of the emerging sociological and economic research in the Trump era has been about this feeling of dispossession by people who feel like they've lost status. And at the same time, it's really important to pursue equity, right? Because there's like deep inequalities in this country. Are there ways to do that don't provoke backlash and a feeling of needing to resort to authoritarian leaders, to anyone who has ideas about that?
Well, I mean, I actually think that promoting egalitarian policies should get widespread support. I mean, obviously, there's going to be a backlash from those who are going to be. There are going to be some people who are going to be worse off. If you have anti-monopoly policies, the monopolists are not going to be happy. If you have progressive tax policies, the people in the upper 0.1% who've not been paying their fair share of taxes are not going to be happy, and they're going to be able to tell a story about how this is going to kill the economy, and they're going to try to instill fear in one way or another that it's a disaster. Going back, President Roosevelt, FDR, was very clear. He said, what I'm going to do is going to get some enemies, and I welcome them because it clarifies. You might say having Social Security is a populist measure, but it made an enormous transformation to the lives of a large number of people. And just, we were talking about, you asked a question about, are there places where it's successful? Yeah, there are lots of places. I mean, I was mentioning Vienna because of how successful it's been in the area of housing. But Vienna has had a progressive government for 100 years. And
may I add just one thing? So there's actually some great research that was actually done in Vienna about this question that you asked, which is when actually immigrants were given a bump up on access to public housing in Vienna, the share of votes for right-wing populists skyrocketed. And so here is a place actually where there's a negative lesson, which is in an era of populism where right-wing populists in particular feed off social and cultural grievances. You do not want to design economic policies that put communal groups in competition with each other. It's much easier, for instance, to say, look, we want billionaires and millionaires to pay more in taxes, right? That actually is pretty successful in garnering support, even from folks who might normally vote, let's say, center-right. But in an era where populists thrive off social and cultural grievances, when you design policies that put communal groups in competition with each other, you are giving a gift to those parties, right? So that's a negative lesson. And actually, there's great research on just from Vienna, which, again, is a good example because you brought it up. That's something that happened in Vienna. A bunch of political scientists watched it. And in exactly the districts in Vienna where that had happened, shares of votes for right-wing populists skyrocketed.
First of all, we're going to take some questions, so
Yep.
start thinking of your best bangers, and I'll take a minute. But I'm so glad you mentioned immigrants, because that's like we haven't even gotten to immigration, which has been so key to the last 10 years. But like, that's the thing, right? People resent when other groups are put in front of them. And so this economic based appeal to the working class versus elite seems to work. There's no reason it shouldn't. But how then do you address racial inequality, gender inequality, the economic fortunes of immigrants? Like, how do we integrate them so that they can continue to be the mobility engine they have for many generations, like, without doing those things, without putting communal groups in opposition to each other?
It's a false structure the way that you've posed the question, because it's not either or. Mm-hmm. Our economy, what is it, $29 trillion economy? You guys know better than I do. But right now, the Kellogg Foundation has done a study a few times, and others have backed it up. There are a bunch of these studies. But essentially, if we had a more equitable economy, one that was more inclusive, it would create $8 trillion worth of additional GDP growth. $8 trillion is not chump change. That is real money. It's not taking away from others. It's actually growing the economy. So if we actually found a way to be more inclusive, we're going to create more economic opportunity for a broader range of people. The other thing to think about is our demographics are not in our favor in this country. They're not in many of the Western world's favor. They're certainly not working for China in the long run as well. But we are under the replacement rate of childbirth. That's why you hear the occupant of the White House.
We're underbabied.
We're underbabied. He wants to have produce more babies. One way to do it, and what actually drove our growth, certainly over the last 5 to 10 years, was largely built off of the fact that we had a huge amount of influx of immigrants who were taking jobs that actually powered our country. When you remove, and I'm not saying that the immigration policy that we have, that we had before, that we have now, is right. I'm just saying that immigrants were the ones who took jobs that helped power the economy. We would not have had that growth without the influx of immigrants. So you have to find people somewhere, and if we want to grow our economy, one way to do it is to be more equitable in the ways that we do it.
Well, so I think one thing that is interesting, tying back a little bit to the Biden administration in the last days, is whether it's in Vienna or in Tacoma, if you are, as a federal government or a local government, if you continue to work on another person's problems without addressing my problems, without doing anything for me, and then telling me that I'm in good shape and don't worry about it, we have to help this other person, that creates a lot of animosity. And I think that leads to a lot of this. And I know that was the case as somebody who was involved in the re-election campaign for Biden. We were looking at all these amazing things that we had done, and we're going out and telling people, like, look, we built this and we did that and whatever. And people were like, yeah, but like, eggs are still expensive, and you're not building housing, and like nothing's happening fast enough to address my issues, and you keep worrying about other people's issues.
I also, it's interesting saying like, oh, this will lead to more growth, right? Like, I try not to say that in stories, like more growth, because nobody knows what that means or why it's good for them. So it's like, trust me, like this will lead to more growth, and everyone's thinking like, but my problems, right?
But my problems.
Okay, question time. Ma'am.
Thank you. Oh, that's so much better. Okay. My name's Khalees. I'm curious, like, capital accumulation has always required, as a necessity, a large amount of inequality in order for that to occur, which is like how the economic growth occurs. So similar to what was being said, like, how is economic growth helpful to us at this point?
Oh, great question. Okay, we're gonna do 2 more, and then we'll bundle them, and then we'll, okay. Can we go here in the front, please?
Hello. Sorry. Hello, my name's Cody Eaton. I'm an organizer with Teamsters Local 804. My question for Professor Stiglitz in particular is that you've argued that inequality is a choice, right? And so that resonated certainly with Bernie Sanders' presidential run. And as you discussed previously, populism does not have to be a bad thing and has spoken to a lot of what people need. So what can we do to harness policies that you could argue are populist on the left wing to actually try to not even reverse, but stem the rising tide of inequality that we've seen for so long?
Good, great. Okay, one more over here.
My question is, are United States and Latin America finding themselves in a context where the effectiveness on political policy is less relevant than the alignment of political discourse with social values?
Wait, can you clarify? Can you say that again?
No worries. United States and Latin America find themselves in a context where the effectiveness of the economic policy is less relevant than the alignment with political discourse in social values?
Okay, I think I get what you mean. Okay. So we're going to do those and see if we have time left over. So some big questions about growth and inequality. Did anyone want to jump in on any of those?
I guess let me try to answer 2 of the questions quickly. The first, the important point you raise is that much of our inequality is not a result of the laws of nature. It's a result of what our own laws and our policies. And it's very deeply ingrained in all of our political legal structure. So, I've argued that all the rules of the game from antitrust, labor relations, bankruptcy law, our expenditure, the way the Federal Reserve is organized, what it does, all of these, each by little by little create inequality. No single thing, but cumulatively have enormous consequences. Much of this has to do with what we call pre-distribution, effects on the market distribution of income and wealth. And the answer of what do we do about it is just figure out how each of these policies has contributed in their own way to that inequality, and try to do the opposite. Or we haven't done enough about antitrust. We've changed the rules of labor legislation in ways that disadvantage workers. The rules of globalization have, again, disadvantaged workers, and you can see, which of those rules work in a particular way. The more obvious things are redistribution, the taxes, the expenditure policy, public education. And those are really important, but the more subtle ones and really the drive a lot of what is going on are the rules of the game that unfortunately are, to a very large extent, not very apparent and are set by the political processes in which the wealthy understand these rules and are driving them in ways that advantage themselves. On the issue of growth and inequality, two things. There's been a major change in perspectives on whether more equality is good or bad for growth. It used to be viewed that there was a trade-off. If you want more equality, you give up an economic performance. That's no longer the broad consensus. And the book I wrote about a little over 12 years ago, called The Price of Inequality, was argued that we pay a price not only in terms of our democratic processes, in terms of our society, but also in terms of our economy from having excessive inequality. But growth doesn't automatically deliver well-being to large fractions of the people. And that is the other piece of the discontent that you see today, because people were promised that it would. That was the idea of trickle-down economics that never had any economic basis to it. And so you really have to structure growth in ways that the results will be shared. And this has been a bipartisan failure. I think that we haven't structured, done enough as we could have to structure it in ways that more of the benefits of what growth we have gone to those in the middle or the bottom. There have been periods in which there has been more egalitarian growth in the decades after World War II. But the decades after the 80s went just the opposite way.
And to get to the final question, which I think is something I wanted to touch on, which is the power of personality in all of this. Because a lot of us were sort of wondering after the election, does policy even matter? It's really just about charismatic leaders. And to get to what everyone wants to talk about, which is our new mayor-elect in New York, he went out, Mayor-elect Mamdani went out and talked to people who were Trump voters and asked them, why did you vote for Trump? And he's ended up winning over a lot of those people with policies around affordability. So I guess how important have just leaders been as opposed to policies when it comes to shifting the course of history?
I mean, I think that policy is important, but particularly for somebody like Mayor-elect Mamdani in an election, it's less important what you're saying to that prospective voter and more that you're actually listening to what they have to say. And that goes a really long way. I think a lot of would-be politicians like to believe that policy is ultimately what voters are voting on, but they do vote on personality. And I think that Mamdani and Trump are in many ways similar and they both made an effort in the course of their elections to try to engage with voters in some way. I think that it was as powerful as Mamdani being at the halal cart as it was Trump being at a French fry line at a McDonald's. It broke a wall in a way between those candidates and the voters. And I think we on the left are often scratching our head on how people can vote against their own seeming economic interests over and over and over again. And I think that part of that is we go back to trust, we go back to people who feel like they're not part of the system. If you actually ask people, if you actually engage people, it has an incredibly powerful effect.
Yeah, I know.
Can I just add one thing to that, though? That if they don't deliver, that will lead to distrust. And I think Mamdani is very aware that he has to produce very quickly. So, not necessarily deliver on everything, it takes time, but he has to at least make clear that he's working on it and that there are some things that can be delivered. Maybe you can give some advice on how to do that quickly.
I see another 7 minutes on the clock. Do we have 7 minutes? We do? Amazing. Yeah, Benga, hey, how's it going?
I actually don't have a question, but...
You can't just be one of those commenters.
I'm not.
Okay.
It's your question that I wanted that you never got answered about how do you actually get people to, like the whole thing about racial inequality and like doing those policies. Because Don, you answered, you said, oh, well, it actually makes things good. But then Mayor Turk was saying that people are like, what did you do for me? And so I actually want the answer to your question of how do you actually get past that?
So I'll take the first stab, and then the others can clean up what I mess up. The problem is that we keep falling into the trap that we've been discussing in this country and in lots of countries around the world of a us versus them mentality. And this notion that because a person of color or a woman or someone who's this or that, gets something, it means that I'm not getting that. That's not the way the world actually works. And that there may be an opportunity that person gets, but if we do things the right way, you can create another opportunity over here. And that could be the right fit for you. So I don't think it's an either or, and we have to, the problem is that the folks who've spent the last 50 years, 40 plus years, breaking down our institutions for delivering to the American people are also the same ones who are pushing the either or approach. And so the institutions are having more difficulty delivering because they're not working as effectively. The guardrails aren't in place. All the policies that have been put in place, let's say during the Roosevelt administration, for instance, those have been eroded at the same time that they're saying, oh, it's because the reason you're feeling this pain, the reason that it's union leaders, they're fat cats. It's the black person who took your job or the immigrant who took your job, and let's blame other countries. And so there's a lot of storm and drumpf, or whatever the saying is, out there that take us away from the reality of what's happening on the ground. And the other problem that we've had, and the mayor was right about this, the Democratic Party sucks at telling stories. Just cannot we are so smarter than everybody else, and we come up with good policies and programs, but like, how do you actually, have you ever spent, my colleagues are great, but I don't think any of them have actually gone to a high school football game. I'm from Ohio, and we've gone to a football game on Friday night and talked with anyone who's at the football game with the things that they're facing. Like, you talk, and I know we're short on time. If you talk about people on some of the things that we delivered about how it is life-changing, that's the way that you actually can begin to get people roped in. I'll give you one example, and I'm going to go after Ezra Klein in specific because he didn't know what he was talking about when he talked about in the broadband program, high-speed internet program. Congress put shackles on all the departments that had those programs and had all these requirements. But you look at what actually happened in a community like in rural Wisconsin, Ripon, Wisconsin. This guy who didn't have a job heard about this program, heard that his friend who was a union member was doing this great work. He said, do you think I can get in on that? He's like, yeah. Got trained for a few weeks, then was out laying fiber across rural Wisconsin. Because of that, he was making good money, so he had this longtime girlfriend. He proposed to his girlfriend. They were able to put down some money for a house, and they're having their first kid. That is life-changing because of this program that not only is delivering great jobs, but is also going to change the game for families who had to go to the McDonald's parking lot during COVID to get their kids online. So that's the sort of thing that we should be messaging better. And so that's how you get at telling a story, delivering good programs, and breaking down the notion that DEI and all these things are going to destroy the country.
Well, I wasn't going to mention abundance and my esteemed colleague, but you went there. So Samira had a question? Oh, did you?
Could you just quickly restate it?
Oh, just how do you actually get people to understand that money for one person doesn't mean less money for you? How do you?
The how is by having authentic conversations with people. And not telling them over and over and over again that they're wrong, either explicitly or implicitly, when they're saying, hey, I just I try to engage as many people as possible. And it's harder for the president to do that or for a senator to do that than it is the mayor of a mid-sized American city. But it's not impossible. There are absolute ways. And I think President Biden was incredibly effective at getting out and talking to Americans about what was going on. That for them, I think it was just an issue of time. There wasn't enough time to deliver those impactful interventions. But having the authentic conversation, letting people know that they're not wrong when they say they're challenged by something, and working through it, right? I think that to your point, it's not just when people see that a policy is benefiting somebody else, like an immigrant family or somebody else who's struggling. It's when people are seeing that the consequences of these economic policies are growing inequality or that the rich guy is getting richer. That's the same kind of discordance that people are frustrated by. And I think that until we start to do a better job of being honest with people, that core honesty, and then trying to structure a policy that meets their needs, until we get to that point, we're always going to have this either-or struggle.
Do you have a last burning question that can be answered in 30 seconds? Okay, I'll try. No, not you. Behind you. Sorry. Sorry, Samira.
Hi, my name is Riddhi, and I'm an MPA student at SIPA. Professor Stiglitz, I had a question for you. You've spoken about, so I've been reading about your work since I think 8 to 10 years now. So I wanted to ask you about how social security policies, like we spoke about, how they are populist. And inherently, USA has been a capitalist society. If I Google the percentages, comes to 60% or more.
Quickly.
And so how do you think income inequality can be addressed? And is it just income inequality, or are we talking about multidimensional poverty here when we talk about inequality? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think all the forms of inequality are interrelated. Income, wealth, health inequalities are a real problem in the United States. Educational inequalities, all these feed into, and then there's inequalities in access to justice, even access to political rights in the United States, we have inequalities. and then all they add up to inequalities of opportunities. Yeah, it's become, they're all interrelated. A note of optimism is for the first time, the G20 is going to be talking about inequality. South Africa, President Ramaphosa has put the inequality on the table, and I asked me to chair an international commission to look at it. And one of our proposals is the creation of an international panel on inequality, analogous to the IPCC, to sort of keep the issue of inequality on the table, to do like the IPCC has done in climate, to give evidence-based knowledge about what's happening, the drivers, the consequences that we've been talking about, the consequences.
We'll look forward to that very much. But now we're in negative time, so we have to clear the stage. But thank you guys so much. This was really great.
Welcome to the stage, Chris Griswold, Faze Shakir, Mary Kay Henry, and moderator Sarah Ellison.
Okay, thank you everyone. I'm Sarah Ellison. I'm a reporter with The Washington Post, where I work out of our democracy group, and I am going to start on my far left. Chris Griswold is the policy director at American Compass, which, according to its website, anyway, that's my best, is developing the conservative economic agenda to supplant blind faith in free markets with a focus on workers, their families, and communities. Faze Shakir, who's a senior advisor to Bernie Sanders and executive director of the nonprofit media organization More Perfect Union, which puts out really great stuff, and Mary Kay Henry, who was from 2010 to 2024. It's a good long time. The international president of the Service Employees International Union. So I'm thrilled to have all of you here with us. And I want to thank Lydia, who was moderating the last panel, for stepping on my original question. I've been covering the Mamdani campaign. I work at the Washington Post, but I was covering the mayor's race here. And I wanted to just open with this, the idea that Mamdani launched his campaign by going to the neighborhoods that had swung the hardest for Trump and talking to people about what they, why they had voted for him. And inevitably it was because they couldn't, he was going to bring prices down, and they couldn't afford their lives, and they had sort of ceased to see the value in a democracy that couldn't provide their material means to live in a democracy. And I've talked to people who have, people who've said to me, well, you're going to get populism one way or the other. You just have to figure out which kind you want. And I wanted to start with you, Chris, and just ask, do you agree with that, or is that sort of a fatalistic way of looking at these things?
Well, not to throw a wrench in the works right at the jump.
Go for it.
I'm not sure how useful I find the term populism. It means a lot of things to a lot of different people. There are versions of the term I would proudly adopt and versions I would reject strongly. And it seems to be one of those words that is deployed pejoratively to circumvent an argument, short-circuit an argument, and whatever. I much prefer the term responsive politics, which I think that gets closer to the heart of what democracy is meant to be. It is meant to be a mechanism whereby the public can express its will and have that will responded to by the leaders of that society. And I think what you see with someone like the mayor-elect, and also you see in someone like President Trump, is they willing to challenge the prevailing orthodoxies in their respective contexts. In the case of President Trump, it's a right-of-center orthodoxy that has been out of touch with working people for 4 decades at least. And I think you saw something similar, as you said, in the context of New York City. But that's what I hope we can spend the time talking about. I think that's the dynamic we are seeing, is that if politics is not responsive to the public, they will elect people who will send a very strong message to the elite that continue to ignore them, that they will make themselves heard one way or the other. And until our, what I would call failed elite, start listening, the beatings will continue until morale improves, right? I think what did you expect was going to happen? If you're upset by the results of these elections, what did you think was going to happen? If a system that calls itself democratic is so profoundly out of touch with what working people are saying quite loudly that they need.
Jump on Chris's point here. I call myself a populist, and it makes me reflect why. And when I think of why I support Senator Sanders, AOCs, or Mamdani, populists that I would describe of the left, I think of it with my political hat on as 3 major components. One is that they all believe in a grassroots energy, that people themselves are a source of inspiration for their campaigns, that they measure themselves to a great degree. To this day, how many people show up at this rally? How many engaged with my email? There's a sense of scale in populism, that I'm not just talking in a room full of 50, that I got to reach large numbers of people, and that when I reach them, there has to be some emotional valence around that attachment. They are in a community. We are building a movement. And that is why people say, well, Bernie's of the left and Trump is of the right, because they share that in common, populism. The second is a sense of disruption of, and I think Chris was getting it, disruption of the status quo. That even if Bernie Sanders were president for 4 years and he was running for president again, do you think he'd be saying, hey, I did all these amazing things, guys, just vote for me? What would Bernie Sanders be doing? He's saying, yeah, I tried to accomplish all these things, and our work is not done because these bastards are still fighting us. And I have much more work to do. Let me tell you who I'm taking on. Which brings me to point number 3, there's always a sense of friction. Always a sense of friction with populists. When you look at the center-right, center-left, technocrats, man, we dissipate friction. I don't want to be upset with anybody. Please don't get upset with me. We can all be nice together. Let's go sit in this nice room and be all nice. And what do populists of the left and right, why I call myself comfortable with disruption, comfortable with the friction, naming and shaming those who stand in the way to accomplish the things that we need to accomplish.
See, that's the definition I can sign on to.
Thank you. There we go. Bipartisanship. Right off the jump. Bipartisan.
Mary Kay, what's your definition of populism while we're at it?
I just think the will of the people can't be expressed in our politic without belonging to organizations that undergird these movements. And I think the attack on the American labor movement and the destruction of workers' organizations over those same 40 years is a key thing that was mentioned in the previous panel, but that I just want to underscore. And that workers being able to join together and make demands on government that are then realized are a way to expand the number of people that participate. And 40 years ago, 35% of the American working class was bargaining and wages were rising for everybody. But now that we're less than 10% and less than 6% in the private sector, wages and benefits and schedules and everything about work has been completely eroded and contributed to the dissatisfaction.
Chris, would you agree with that, or are you?
Yeah, well, I am reliably informed that conservatives are better at telling stories than liberals. So let me tell you a story. I'm also told that we're here to talk about practical, things we can do. So let me talk about Aristotle and go back 2,300 years. Aristotle wrote about civic friendship, which is his word for that kind of base level of goodwill that people have one towards another in a functional society. And that, for Aristotle, was a feature of societies that worked rather than devolving into like tribal warfare and conflict. And for Aristotle, for the students in the room who have read their Aristotle, for him that was a friendship of utility, which just meant you didn't have to have some grand moral virtuous regard for your fellow. All you needed to know was that you depended on each other. You were interdependent with one another. And the place that you discovered that you were interdependent on one another and could therefore develop civic friendship, which made the society work, was in the economic sphere, because that is the space in which we are most pragmatically confronted with the reality that I need you and you need me. If you break that relationship and you instead construct a society which very clearly tells workers, actually, I don't need you. I can actually make my profit by shipping all your jobs overseas, by producing overseas, by the whole host of by financializing the economy and not actually worrying about you at all and just making my money on Wall Street. If you, by your economic structures, communicate to workers that actually I don't think we are in a relationship of mutual economic interdependence, you are assaulting the one of the foundations of a functional democratic society, in my opinion. This is also something, for what it's worth, in the American context, that Martin Luther King understood very, very, very well in his speeches to the labor movement, when he would go in front of the labor movement and try to convince them to come on sides of the civil rights movement. He would say the civil rights movement and the labor movement can be the twin architects of American democracy and realize the unrealized dream of American democracy. And what he meant was that access to the ballot box was a necessary but not sufficient condition of democracy. Participation in the economic life of the nation was the other precondition of a functional, real sense of democracy. So, to answer your question, yes, because the way in which you communicate to a worker that they are in fact a participant in a shared economic enterprise is to ensure that workers have a voice and power in that relationship. And even Adam Smith knew that you can't do that without mechanisms of collective voice and power, because an individual worker and an individual employer will always have a power imbalance. You need mechanisms of collective voice and power. So, because we're here to talk about populism, the economy, and democracy, that's how I would string it together. So yes, the death of the labor movement is a bad thing. The fact that only 6% of American private sector workers are union members is a bad thing. We may disagree on some fun ways about what to do about it, but I think we agree that that is not good for democracy.
I want to get back to the disagreements, but I want to ask you, Faz, you've also said and argued that that we should have more working people not just participating in the economy, but writing economic policy or participating in that process. I just want to hear you talk about exactly what that would look like.
Because we have gotten detached from the working class, we as a center-left movement. And when we fight for economic democracy, let's combine those two. In the political sense, we all know what we're talking about when we say democracy. We generally know that we want one person, one vote, representation at the ballot box. The person who wins the election should hold office. In the economic sense of democracy, we know that it parallels the political universe in such that when we have authoritarians ruling in politics, we also have authoritarians ruling in our economy. And when you're saying, well, how do we solve for this? We want economic democracy. Power needs to devolve down. Well, how do we get into the devolve down solutions? This is where I think the center-left, as we are building it, has not been bold and innovative enough. It helps explain why Zoran is where Zoran is that he says, okay, break the box a bit, think outside the bubble. In our minds, economic democracy, workers do not have power. The makers of our economy don't have power. The takers have the power. So how do you change that? Well, you have to change ownership design. Who is owning parts of our economy? Well, can workers sit on a board? Can workers form a co-op? Can we have a tenants union? Can we form a farmers cooperative? Of course we can. Can we use the federal powers or the government power, the local powers here, procurement differently? I know in talking to Mayor-elect Zoran Mamdani, I know he's thinking about this, which is the power of the city is not only in paying wages, but it's also in procurement. What if you incentivize local farms to build sustainable food that services the New York City public schools? What if you establish contracts such that the government could be in a role of providing a low-cost food for more people? Of course. Why are we thinking that way? Because if left to its own devices, this current economy is becoming more detached from regular people. The people who control it, and obviously artificial intelligence data centers are telling us as such, that they will make a design for this economy that has nothing to do with you or your interests. And so the next phase of where we're at is the fight over representational democracy in our economy for workers. And my struggle and my pain of right now is that I do not see enough curiosity, interest in a center left of saying, I really want to know what the workers are thinking about. I really want to understand their economy. I really want to know the challenges and the pains that they're going through so that I can better represent it. And when people see those few instances, the glimmers of hope of like, oh, that person has integrity. They look like they give a damn about my life. They happen to become a mayor of New York City.
So are there other examples other than in New York where that's happened successfully?
I think in this moment, I am seeing more people wanting to act that way. There's a growing movement of people talking about the power of a billionaire class, talking about wealth and income inequality than they have had in the past 2 cycles. The challenge I now have for many of them is, can you marry that with a sense of what your authorities are to do something about it? Give some concrete suggestions as to what you will do, and then be held accountable for it. Right now, you have again, I don't mean to make this about Democratic Party, but there was a time in which them talking about the minimum wage was just a standard. I mean, you're a Democrat. You talk about the minimum wage. The last time we raised the minimum wage was actually coming out of this similar cycle where a Republican president held office, Democrats won the election in 2006, held the House and the Senate, and they forced a raise from $5.15 to $7.25 an hour. And that, my friends, is the last time we ever raised the minimum wage, back in 2007, because Democrats had a demand and they made it on the Republican president, and it happened. Since that period of time, conversation has largely evaporated. Thanks to SEIU and the Fight for 15 that Mary Kay led, there's been movements across America, but not mirrored in our politics. Why? Because right now we don't have enough, Democratic leaders who think that the job, to your point, is to say, what is a concrete solution we could demand, and when we get in office, we're going to demand it on behalf of workers. That is missing.
And a demand that's connected to people's basic dignity at work, which I think Chris has talked about, like the moral imperative. Mm-hmm. And so for me, the Fight for 15 was a lesson in you don't have to poll, you don't have to think if it's politically viable. You think, what do working people need in order to get on the subway, get to work, care for their kids, do their rent? And it was 200 workers in a community room in the Bronx who came up with the Demand 15. And the Democratic conversation at the time was between 9 from President Obama and 1010 from Senator Harkin. And that demand and movement created policy. Do you see?
Yeah,
and not only for 26 million, and it's locked out. There's still 40 million stuck at 725 and tipped workers fighting at Waffle Houses all across the South that earn 325 and get meal deduction. So they're making a demand. But I agree that we haven't been bold enough. We haven't thought enough about not policies, and I don't know the economic terms. I think it's pre-distribution, post-distribution, whatever, one of those things. But how is it something that workers can feel respected in the work they do, as opposed to something the government gives me and gives other people? That's the way. If we're listening to workers, we will learn in the way I think the mayor did here, the mayor-elect, what people want and how government can help address the most painful parts of their lives.
Talk a little bit more about that Fight for 15, because it's such a, I like to ground, because I'm a reporter, I like to ground conversations in specifics. And when you say that that's not where the political class was, how did they get that to be what?
Well, I remember Democratic congresspeople calling me at the time the demand was made, which was in November of 2012, right after President Obama's re-election. This is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And you must be kidding. There's no way in hell that's ever going to happen. And so this is why it is about what is our imagination. And then I would break it down in the way that workers taught us. Like, here's a monthly budget. And here's what 725, when we're working 20 hours a week, gives people. And it was myth busting about these are teenager jobs in fast food. These are moms and dads, mostly Black, brown, and immigrant workers, mostly women. And so there was a way in which that job wasn't respected from jump, and the fight helped people understand who's really doing that work. And so, but the unfinished business of that movement, in my mind, is how to build a powerful, durable organization of the 26 million workers whose wages got raised as a result of the movement, and that they are galvanized to think about the 90 million more that we have to go get. In thinking on a scale that the current American labor movement isn't doing.
Right. So what is it that you two disagree on? We've trashed Ezra Klein. We've done a couple of interesting things today, but
we can do more of that. That's fine.
No, I'm joking, but I do want to.
And I'd like the disagreement to be in the spirit of how do we, given that we have this meta agreement on the basic value, how do we find a common ground to move forward? Because nobody likes the rising inequality,
right?
And the idea that 2 million people not getting a paycheck for the last 40 days throws those families into crisis because we can't afford a $400 emergency in the majority of families in the country.
Right.
Well, I guess if I was to try and offer a constructive provocation, here's one. CNN did an exit poll after the 2024 election and asked people to what extent they thought democracy was on the ballot. He's like, not at all, a little bit, somewhat. Like, I am very concerned it was definitely on the ballot. That last option was the most popular one. And of the people who chose that option, a majority voted for Trump. And I like that stat because I think it challenges a certain type of discourse, especially on the kind of respectable center left, of what we mean when we say defend democracy. And defending democracy gets collapsed into opposing Donald Trump in this kind of short-term partisan sense that I think misses the much deeper question of why this system has not been responsive to working people for decades. A couple weeks ago, we have got a Teamster in the audience. A couple weeks ago, I was at the Teamsters headquarters in DC. And the reason I was there is because they were holding an event celebrating the relationship of Catholic social teaching and the labor movement, and the resource that that particular religious tradition offers in thinking through some of these questions about how to ensure that workers have dignity in the economy. A bunch of Democratic members of Congress was there. Josh Hawley was there. The Teamsters didn't put people's affiliation or organizations on the name tags because they didn't care. It was this celebration of an intellectual and religious resource that has for a long time given people insight into how to provide for dignity in the economy, that brought together a coalition that makes a lot of people very uncomfortable. You talk about putting workers on the board. One of the most prominent proponents of doing that in the last couple of months has been Senator Bernie Moreno, Republican of Ohio, wanting to put workers on corporate boards. The person, if we do see viable labor law reform in this Congress, the person most responsible for that will be Josh Hawley and his collaboration with the Teamsters. That makes a lot of people on the left really uncomfortable. And I think the challenge is, to my friends on the left, is to break the assumption that that type of collaboration is impossible, because it's not. And to your question, too, of where we might disagree on how to provide for a more robust labor movement, if you poll American workers that say they would not vote to join a union, the primary reason why is the perception that unions are extremely partisan. If you poll current union members and ask what they like least about their union, it's its political activity. And I think if we can depoliticize worker organizations, there's a whole half of the country, the whole half of the working public that leans right, that would be very interested in joining a labor organization, but don't. for that reason. And fixing that problem will make a whole bunch of professional Democrats in D.C. very, very unhappy. But I think if we did that, we'd be miles further down the track towards a healthier labor movement.
And is the problem just that politicians who are interested in getting the votes of working people are mostly just interested in that, as opposed to addressing their day-to-day concerns? Faz, I want to hear what you have to think about that.
Right. I mean, that wasn't much of a provocation, so I didn't. I will try to
do one better.
I am more.
Better.
Yeah, I'm more worried about that. Right-wing populists are better politics essentially right now. That they are winning elections because the words coming out of Donald Trump's mouth and Josh Hawley's mouth, and we can name a few, who go out there and talk to working class people, is compelling. When you listen to them talk, and it's like, okay, well, let's match this up with, let me hear a Democrat tell me about the economy. And it is more disruptive. It is more emotional. There's a sense of, I will come in and I understand your pain. And so we're, on the Bernie side of the ledger here, concerned that language right now, if you feel your pain quotient is being met by a right-wing populist language that isn't matched by generally a left, that is changing because Trump is losing increasingly with his agenda people who are moving away from him. So that, on that side, score is good. But then when you're thinking about the Democratic brand, and you're saying, okay, are they coming back to us with the basis of a working class support such that they think this is my home? That is not yet happening. But we can and will build towards that if we recognize that that's the problem. That right now, the understanding, if I go into a House Democratic Caucus meeting, one of my major frustrations, and I go to, there's 218 or so of them, and I say to most of them, tell me about your district. I'm going to ask you the following questions. Tell me about paid leave in your district. Tell me about health care. Who's got it, who doesn't? How much are they paying? Who's your biggest employer? What are the wages? Do people have retirement? When you get into those kinds of questions, I want a curiosity and an interest from a Democratic Party who's like, yeah, let me tell you, I got this thing and this thing and this thing. I got this group of people who are hurting this. But I'll tell you my own reflection on this is when I go into that meeting and I ask those questions, maybe ChatGPT this thing here. Hold on, let me find out about my own district. And like, no. Now you don't know. The whole point of this democracy is you better know what's going on. And so they could tell you, biggest employer is a bank, or biggest employer is a healthcare hospital. And then they want to assure me, I got a good relationship. I got a good relationship with the auto dealers. Like, what? No, what about the auto workers? What about, how many Starbucks facilities you got in there? How much are they getting paid, right? That discourse of wanting to be close to that helps govern how you think and talk as a governing party. And when you become disassociated from that, you yield the floor to right-wing populists. I tend to think we are at our strongest when workers believe, hey, you are supposed to represent me. Mayor Kay can vouch for this. I'll turn it over to her for a second. But sometimes when I go and talk to workers on strike, some of the anger that I get most at is sometimes directed at their own union leadership. And I was like, I'm always confused by that. Why are you so upset at your own union leadership? I mean, what's the deal with that? They're like, oh, the corporate bosses, I know what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to look out for their bottom line, and they do. But you know who's supposed to fight for me? My union leadership. And my point is they hold the union leadership and unions to a higher standard. That's the Democratic Party. Right. You're saying, I've associated you with being in my back, and when I feel or sense that you have let me down, I penalize you harder than I do the other people.
Do you think that's all that the Democratic Party did to alienate working people?
No, well, I mean, we could go through the litany of
yeah,
history of policy.
Like we were talking in the
I'm
green
saying
room, like, when
we're
did
trying
it start?
to we're trying to solve
for
it. I'm more interested in solving for it, right? So I'm saying you can get working class people who are increasingly leaving the Democratic coalition. How would you start to get them back? Not to relitigate NAFTA and go through every failure of the past 2 decades, but to think I can reconnect with working class people and understand how and why they hold me to a higher bar and assume a certain thing that they want from me, and I can meet that bar.
So yeah, Mary Kay, please.
Yeah, I'm just curious on the, Chris, the 2 things that I've heard you say that I don't think I've heard as clearly tonight is that you're not sure in the future of rebuilding the labor movement that the use of strikes we should curb the use of strikes and the engagement in politics. I heard you kind of hint at it here, because I thought those were the two places of disagreement most between us. And even on the idea around worker boards, for me, the notion that one worker sitting on a corporate board that has no organization behind them that allows them to speak on behalf of a unionized workforce, like, would there be willingness to put people on corporate boards and require neutrality from employers on the question of whether workers want to form a union at that firm, so that the worker could actually represent the interests not just of themselves or what they guess to be the majority of the workforce, but all workers, is one question I would have. And then the other is, I haven't had the lived experience of workers inside of SEIU or other unions being mad at their union about partisanship. I do think that the way unions endorse candidates needs to be incredibly thoughtful so that workers have the experience that there was a robust process for deciding who the union would endorse, whatever level, city, state, federal. But in our union, workers see the political process as equally important to collective bargaining, because so much of the way workers win gains is through the political process. So home care workers can't have unions unless they go to their state legislatures and rewrite the rules so that they can have a union, because they were written out of the 1930s labor law. Same with gig workers. Gig workers in Massachusetts and California are exercising political power together even before a legal union in order to form a union. So I just don't understand how workers could be separated from their ability to act in civil society as an organization as well.
Well, there's a lot there, so let me try and tease out what I think the different questions in your question were. One, well, let's start at the end first. On the question of organized labor and politics, I am responding to repeated survey data from multiple sources that tell me nationwide that the perception that organized labor is an appendage of the Democratic Party harms the ability of organized labor to recruit. That's not the only reason that organized labor has been in decline. We have also, to your point, permitted a legal regime that is incredibly hostile to the right, exercising the right to organize. We've also experienced macroeconomic trends like globalization that have changed the way the big picture market forces put pressure on businesses and workers. That's all true. It is also true that it is just demonstrably the case that when you ask them, workers would prefer, on the whole, worker organizations that are focused on the immediate economic issues in the way they conduct themselves. So that's point number one, and that's where I'm coming from, is that one step on the road to expanding worker voice and power, I think, has to be communicating that those mechanisms are for everyone, regardless of what your political preference is. And that is not the way I think a lot of working people currently perceive to be the case. You asked a couple of really specific policy questions, so rather than kind of drag us into the weeds on the policy, I'll just say we have some awesome white papers on our website that speak exactly to your question. Of course, a worker or workers on a corporate board need some mechanism for the workforce to select that person. If that person is chosen by, management, that's kind of defeats the point, right? So 100%, and we've got a lot of thoughts about how you can do that in a unionized workplace, how you could do it in a workplace that isn't unionized or not unionized yet, how you could do it in a non-unionized workplace but not undercut the motivation to eventually unionize. There's a lot of valid questions there, and we could talk through all of that. But I think the bigger picture on that is that there has been a focus on our current business by business model of labor organizing that has been here since the 1930s in the National Labor Relations Act, that in my opinion is no longer fit for purpose, and that we need to blow open the box of our imagination and have a much wider menu, longer menu of options. Workers on boards, works councils for more collaborative discussions, which they do a lot in Europe and could work well here. Sectoral bargaining, in which the hard bargaining happens at the industry level. So it's not your McDonald's, it's all fast food franchises that are setting a floor for what their workers are paid, which would be great. I mean, what that would mean is all of those businesses would have to compete not on a race to the bottom on wages, but on the stuff we actually want them to compete on quality and service and innovation and all these other things that are good for society. We aren't doing any of that. And what our work is focused on is trying to expand that menu of options for workers to express their voice and collective power at work. On that list is trying to depoliticize our current organizing model, labor law model, but that is definitely not the only thing that matters.
So Fez, what would be, when we're talking about solutions, that's what we're supposed to be figuring out here, what is sort of the lowest hanging fruit solution that you would introduce to us tonight?
Instead of lowest hanging out, maybe I'll just challenge everyone to think differently. And I don't know, actually, Mary Kay, if this is a good idea, and so you feel free to correct me. I'm worried now we're in a place, you take the minimum wage, you take paid leave, where because we have fewer economic actors who are oligopolists of the economy, one of our challenges is we're also engaged in an anti-monopoly movement at the same time. We're trying to break up power, devolve power. I'm in my head, not that I like it because I'm a universalist, I'm a supporter of Medicare for all, right? I like policies for all. But I am more wrestling with the idea that in order to get to places of more equality in our economy, that you could, in theory, have the biggest employers by revenue have to pay a higher wage. That you would have bigger employers by revenue paying to retirement and pensions. That a government role would require that of certain size, that we demand that if you're Amazon and if you're Starbucks and you make shit tons of money in this economy, you don't get it off the churn of your workforce so you burn every 12 months. That we are going to demand that if you're a giant coffee chain, you're going to have to pay a higher wage. Maybe that local coffee chain, therefore, does a different kind of living wage. And I say that only, and I just throw this out because I'm just honestly been wrestling with this for a while, is we've got to solve both of the problems at the same time, improve worker conditions and dignity of their work and respect it, while also challenging the power of monopolists who have too much control over this. So I don't think it would be a great thing that we all say we have one great United Healthcare. We got Medicare for all. It's not government, it's United Healthcare. And as a result, they control the entire marketplace. And we can go down sector by sector by sector, in which you could imagine that could happen. And I'm saying we have to challenge that. We have to break up that while improving worker standards. So that's been a thing I've been wrestling with in my head.
We are going to open it up to questions, so start to think about your questions, but I want to go to you, Mary Kay, to just hear your response to that.
I think it was something that the Seattle City Council had the biggest firms go first on the minimum wage. I don't know if you remember that. And then the smaller firms followed. Because the theory was people were going to have more money in their pockets to spend in the neighborhood that would then allow the small businesses to follow. The big firms kind of helped lift the floor first, and then everybody got to the same. So I actually like thinking about it. The other thing I wonder is, can we, while we're dealing with the backsliding of democracy and increased authoritarianism, imagine how big private employers in communities are held to account and invest in some community labor bargaining table by creating, like, we have this idea at Duke University in Durham where organizing's happening with the public school teachers, the university workers, and the community that's been kind of bled dry by the university. Can the university imagine an endowment or trust fund that's created that deals not just with the workers' demands and their conditions, but also community, which would deal with healthcare, housing, education, which are the big three that are the demands there, and try and figure out innovations that would point the light toward something we could do at the federal level when we don't have a government that's colluding with corporations, as the More Perfect Union website has a very cool, you like that? Yeah, it's a very cool tool, isn't it? That lists the ways in which corporations are kind of making deals for their own wealth and profits through the current administration. And so I've been thinking about how do we intervene in this period in a way that shows local and state ways to get to something national.
And can I just add one more comment on both of those points? One of the areas that I am most hopeful in the immediate term for a new consensus to emerge is antitrust. And in some ways, almost the more kind of right-wing populist you are, the more open to that you tend to be. And there's, I think, a really encouraging emerging new agreement that concentrated market power is as threatening to democracy as concentrated state power, including from a lot of folks on the right of center. So just to end on that hopeful note of potential cross-ideological agreement.
No, that was one of my favorite things when I saw right-wing influencers who were talking about how much they love Lena Khan. It's kind of incredible. Okay, we're going to go to questions, and we're going to do the same thing with the last panel. We're going to bundle them, which means you will ask several of them, and then we will have our panelists answer. So, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much for a really thoughtful discussion. I was wondering, Fez, when you were talking about, well, all of you were talking about this failure of responsiveness, which I really like the opposite of that as a definition of populism. And I was wondering how much, to what extent and how you would attribute that failure of responsiveness to the incentives associated with political fundraising and how that affects the Democrats and Republicans differently from your perspectives.
Okay, well, political fundraising. Another question right here in the middle.
Hi, thanks everyone. I'm Danny Denari. I'm a professor of political science at Syracuse. So my question centers on what broadly the left and maybe the neoliberal left should do about Trump. Right now, the left, and especially the neoliberal left, is focused on demonizing Trump for the benefit of the Democratic Party electorally, perhaps in the future. But do you think there's sort of some missed opportunities for manipulating Trump, given that he's not very ideological, and pushing him towards some of the policies that you're proposing?
Can't wait to hear the answer to that one. We have another question in the second row here.
I know you mentioned, of course, Josh Hawley, Teamsters, that's happening. Personally, not a fan. But the reason I bring it up is to your point that the number, like half of the people could be won over if their unions weren't so political. Personally, I talk to workers every day. That's my job as a union organizer. That is rarely the top objection, even if it may be a widely felt one. But when we constantly hear this talk of, the realignment of the American working class, then in reality, at least in Teamsters membership, just kind of reflects the demographics that are already shifting right. What do we do to focus on these things that could actually be mutually beneficial, but are not just a bait and switch? Because there are plenty of other policies that Hawley supports that are very hostile to workers' continued progress. But, just dangling that one positive thing, saying, hey, look, we can work across the aisle, when you're just selling them short further on is not going to do any help, and it's not going to create any lasting traction that's bipartisan.
Do we have any other questions? Otherwise, we will jump in, and I'm not going to decide who gets to answer what, just whoever feels most passionately, or I can if you don't want to.
Money in politics, obviously, it's a corrosive.
Has your name written
corrosive forever, right? It is in so many ways that people don't know. Obviously, super PACs is its own beast of terribleness. And you see now increasingly crypto, APAC, other major funders deciding that in the course of a Democratic primary, we're going to jump in and take the side of a particular person. Why are they doing that? And it tends to, in my mind, be a lot of class-based conversations. I mean, yes, there's some other issues, but generally because there's one candidate who is concerning to the rule of elites and the rule of wealth, and therefore they're going to get involved. So it's having corrosive impact in super PACs. Obviously, you know that there's been a congressional stock trading conversation that's been going on. It's also corrosive in the sense that people are just aware of their passive income. I mean, passive income in general at this stage is so corrosive to a dynamism of an economy. When you have so many people sitting at a keyboard saying, I didn't work, I didn't deliver any coffees today, I invested in NVIDIA, and NVIDIA went up a bazillion %. And when you're in Congress and utilizing inside information, that sense of them, I guarantee you, go around them, they know what's in their portfolio. So you're going to tell them to go take on Boeing? Yeah? You're going to go stand with the Boeing workers on strike during the campaign, dear Kamala Harris? No, you're not. No, you're not. Many of them did not, right? We were in the midst of that campaign for 107 days. Boeing workers were on strike for about a third of it. Did you hear anything about it? Did any Democrat mention? No. And I say these are the ways in which money is affecting the way in which people think. And I'm saying people are not stupid. They're like, hey, I don't think you're extending yourself on my behalf, and there must be a reason for it. You are not boldly taking on power. There must be a reason for it. And it is true, they are not dumb, that yes, money plays a role. My point is that money is playing a role in a lot of different forms in which the lobbyists have a say with them and who their inputs are. This is, by the way, just real quickly on this, the inputs. This is why I want them to get out and do town halls, meet working class people, because if you don't do that, I always talk to some members of Congress, who has your text number? Who has your email address? Who's able to get you on a phone call at 9 p.m. at night? People with money and influence and power. That's who. It is not your local, Teamster official on the ground dealing with the problem who is able to get to you. It is like the head of that company. And so, I think changing the inputs back into this such that you can start to countervail the power of money, because what countervails the power of money? The power of people.
And how do you get politicians to actually talk to working people? I mean, they have to be voted out before they actually would do that? Or, I mean, how do you incentivize people to do that?
Well, you have to create the structures of grassroots organizing. That's why we care a lot about this. You go and talk to people. Like right now, let's say if I dropped any of you in a town hall in America, and I said, there's 100 people in the room, what are you going to go talk about? What are the issues that are on your mind? Well, one, you should be soliciting them for what are the issues that are going on here. But then you have to have your own sense. Are there things that really are upsetting you? And I'll tell you right now, like you get to a place of disassociation. I tell you the issue of artificial intelligence. If I went in, if this room was like, 10 times this size, and I asked you to raise your hands, around this issue, I guarantee people, there'd be an emotion there. Why? Because they sense this is the rule of an oligarchy. They're setting the rules of me. Does anyone think about my life? Does all the impacts of them taking my land, my water, my electricity rates going higher, the future of humanity and our relationships being jeopardized, the way I raise my children, loneliness. You can go on and on and on. And yet, if you had to check yourself, say how many people walking in a town hall have that conversation right now on a Democratic side? And that's the point, is that you want that association so that people can input into you and get you on the right track. And it's possible. It's a solvable thing.
I think it's really well said. I mean, and it's to me, it speaks to just how broken our political categories are. Go to D.C., it's like, well, the conservatives think that a free market for business is the bulwark against overbearing state power. And the progressives think that like a strong state is how you protect against, business run amok. When you talk to, just people, they don't see that much of a difference between big business and big government. It's all the same people rotating in and out of those jobs, which is true. That is in fact how it works. And it's like these tired categories just don't map onto reality very well. So yeah, I mean, let's overturn Citizens United if we can. I think that probably all agree about that, but it goes much deeper to where we started at the beginning, which is the structure of how we do our economics and our politics communicates to working people that they are widgets of production rather than human persons with dignity that are co-creators of economic value, and that's That's the message we are sending, and I agree it needs to change, and I don't see how it changes without more forums and mechanisms for the expression of worker voice and power.
Are Democrats missing an opportunity to manipulate Donald Trump by constantly attacking him? I think that was a question.
But on
right?
just real quick, because Mary Hayes worked a lot of her life on healthcare. Like what we have done over the course of a 40-day shutdown is, for the first time, Trump has got for many, many years, I'm going to come forward with a healthcare plan. Wake me up when that arrives. But in lieu of just cutting Medicaid and trying to repeal Obamacare a million times, he's now said we're going to give money in the form of a check for HSAs. I don't even know where he's coming up. But I will say that what is now happening is reality is biting, because you're going to have tens of millions of people whose health care is going to go up unnecessarily. And I am hopeful of the moment that, hey, forget your politics. What do you do about somebody who's going to have an unaffordable health care premium and is going to choose to be uninsured? It could create a ripple through the entire system, undermine the whole thing, even more dysfunctional than the current dysfunctional healthcare system is. What do you want to do about it? And there's like glimmers where he's starting to trying to figure out something.
Yeah. And that's what I would do. It's just, Foz just took us to an issue where you could imagine, what if we, organize the 600,000 people that are losing health insurance in North Carolina, and there's like terrible numbers in every state, and made a demand. Because 2,000, I thought it was frankly another stroke of genius on his part, because 2,000 for somebody that can't afford a $400 emergency seems like, damn, bring it. Even though it won't buy me what I need, So that's why I don't think manipulation is possible without organizing and making a demand and being very disruptive. I don't think it happens through the stratosphere. It happens from the ground up in ways that have to be as disruptive as he is being, I would say. I don't know if you all agree. But.
Well, I want to make sure we speak to the Teamster organizer question about what if it's a bait and switch from the populist right? And I would say two things, one immediate term and one big picture. Immediate term, my experience is that a lot of these folks are more sincere in their interest in finding creative ways to enhance worker power than you may suspect. I think that's true. I also think that, the phrase limousine liberalism has been around for a long time. We all know it. These are the people who go to their fancy book clubs and talk about how important it is to elect Democrats, and then also complain about like the affordable housing unit being built next door because it disrupts the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. Like, that is rightly mocked and is being electorally punished across the country. We know that. I think there is such a thing as limousine populism as well, where it is perfectly possible for a more sophisticated politician than the limousine liberals who are losing to be more in tune with that sense of anger and frustration that we're talking about, speak to it better rhetorically, and then not deliver. And so the big picture question of, I think that I would say to your question is, well, that's what democracy is for. If they don't deliver to your satisfaction, well, then you have an opportunity to speak to that in the next election and the election after that. If they do, great. And my hope is for the emergence again of a genuine new consensus, cross-partisan consensus on these issues. But if, frankly, the right or left continue to fail to deliver that, punish them at the ballot box for it. That's what it's for.
Thankfully, it's populist people that are leading this. That's what has changed. The entire populace is populist. And Bernie, I think, raised the, in the most, when Trump comes into office, he's thinking he's high and mighty, and then within a couple of months, we're going to do a fight oligarchy rally, and everyone's like, holy cow, where are all these people coming from? Why are they coming out in such large numbers? Because they are telling you a message that to the politicians, and some are better at listening to it than others. You see MTG and, some on the right making overtures of, listen, I'm just saying that all they're doing is listening to some people. And I have the same doubts that you about will the great populist policy, disruption that we need come from the right. Cast me as dubious. The guy, with the East Wing Gold Room Ballroom or whatever the hell is going to lead us. I don't think so, but he's going to help disrupt this such that somebody with integrity, that's the word of the moment for me, integrity. That when you say and campaign on it, you know about the people for whom you represent, when you get into office and all the corrupt lobbyists and all the wealth and that comes down on your head, that you can still, if every man, Rudyard Kipling poem, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blame it on you, that integrity, I think, resides with some of the populists I see on the left. The goal for them is to, when they hold power, to hopefully have concrete solutions and continue to earn that and build upon it. That's the moment we're in.
I'm so proud of all of us. We're now 37 seconds over on time, and so I think we're going to have to wrap up. But thank you you guys were incredible. Thank you very much, and thank you to the audience.
Please welcome to the stage Dean Karen Yarhi Milo.
Hi everyone. I know it's late. I'm going to be short. Just wanted to, I'm Karen Yarhi-Milo. I'm the Dean of SIPA. It's wonderful to be with you today. I want to extend a special thanks to IGP, to Alex Hertel-Fernandez for this incredible work that he now launched as part of the new initiative on American democracy here at IGP at SIPA. There's so much that Alex and the team are doing, and as well as the Washington Center for Equitable Growth. I think it's wonderful collaboration. I'm so glad that we were able to get this going today, and I look forward to seeing the recording. So we heard throughout the evening the rise of authoritarian populism is really not just a political trend. It really poses a profound challenge to democracy and inclusive economic growth. There are so many issues that you discussed today and so many more issues that we will discuss. And this is why the core issue of democratic resilience is one of the core issues that we're looking at SIPA. And now it's more important than ever. And this is a problem in the United States, but we see really democracy coming under strain around the world. And it's important for an institution like ours to study this, to understand it, to offer solutions, and to think rigorously about what we can do and bring the scholars and the policy community, public officials, policy advisors, everybody together to really understand what's at stake and how we move forward and how we fight against democratic backsliding. And I'm very, very excited about this, especially the moment where we get to launch the American Democracy Initiative under the stewardship of Alex and many other colleagues that are very, very excited about this. This is an invitation to have a dialogue, so we're not in silos. And this is kind of an important event that we're going to see many more like this that we will convene. And so I encourage you to please stay engaged with us. Later this week, we will continue this conversation at a special roundtable featuring Alex and Mary Kay Henry, and you heard from today, and joined by Stacey Abrams, one of our former Carnegie Distinguished IGP Fellows, to discuss a new campaign to mobilize Americans in defense of democracy. What can be more important than that? So I hope that you will join us. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, Alex, for all the work that you do. Thank you to the IGP and SIPA team for putting this together. Have a wonderful rest of the evening, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you. Yes, I would love to. Alex.